Well, hello everyone. My name is Katrina Kibben, and I'm the managing editor of Recruiting Daily. Thanks for joining our webinar today, sponsored by our friends over at Indeed. You're taking a look at our title slide, and we promise to jump right in soon. But before we get started, you have to give me just 1 minute to go over some tips for using GoToWebinar, and then I'll hand it over to kick things off. Now, you may feel like you're about to listen to instructions on how to fasten your seatbelt and lift those tray tables, but for those of you attending a webinar for the first time, listen up. For those of you who aren't, sorry. The first thing is your audio. By default, you've joined listening through your computer speaker system. If you'd like to listen to the webinar using your phone, find the audio pane on the right side of your screen and select Use Telephone. That will display the dial-in information and access code you need. If you're hearing any jumpiness or you're not hearing it in time and you can tell, it's probably because your internet's not keeping up, and this is a great way to be able to stay on the line and be able to listen to all the great tips Bianca's going to bring to you. Second, how you participate. So all of you are in listen-only mode and in plain English. That means you will not have the ability to speak directly with us during the webinar today. But you can ask as many questions as you want. Please don't be shy. Just type the question into the question pane and click Send. At the end, we'll do a live Q&A, time permitting, and take as many questions as we can. We'll be sure to provide responses to all questions we can't answer during the webinar immediately following. If you want to, go ahead and say hi now and give it a test to make sure it's working. I'm watching all of your messages, and we'll make sure to address each one as we can. And don't worry, if you can't stay until the Q&A, we'll send you a recording of this webinar within 48 hours of the event. Now, if you're on Twitter, you can follow the conversation by following @recruitingblogs or the hashtag IndeedInsights. Now, I just want to give one more big shout out to our sponsor, Indeed, who made this webinar possible, and I'll hand it off to Bianca now to kick things off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katrina. Hello, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. As Katrina mentioned, I am with Indeed, and I am what we call a recruitment evangelist. And, I have a pretty cool job. I get to partner up with companies and employers such as yourself and really come to speak and highlight strategies, dig into data. And really, I think the reason we're all on the phone is, hopefully give you some takeaways and some action items that you can take back to your business to allow you to hire better. So I'm going to walk us through what we call transformational talent. It's the portrait of high potential workforce. And afterwards, as Katrina mentioned, we're going to pause for some questions. So be thinking about, questions or observations as I walk us through the content. So let's get started. We're going to kick it off with this thought. If you think about it, in every field of human endeavor, there are people who accomplish extraordinary things. And some examples of that are Bobby Fischer. Undoubtedly, he was the best chess player in the world. Zaha Hadid, who unfortunately recently passed away, was the first Arabic woman to receive many accolades, such as the Nobel Peace Prize for architecture, and her beautiful buildings can still be seen all around the world. J.K. Rowling, who I'm sure most of us know on the phone, began writing the series of books that would become the most widely sold book with the Harry Potter series while she was actually on welfare. And certainly with over 400 million unique books sold later, I highly doubt that's still the case. This is one of my favorites, and Jose is an interesting fella. I don't know if we have any Red Sox fans or Boston fans on the phone, but in Boston, if you want to sell vending items at Red Sox baseball games, there is a tenure system where the most tenured employees get to choose which section they're going to sell in. So, if you want to sell hot dogs behind home plate, you also pick what you're going to sell, or if you want to sell beer behind the bleachers. Well, Jose hasn't been there that long, but even though he's far down on the pecking order, he has the highest grossing sales. He is the top seller out of any of his peers in any section of the ballpark. Finally, and we're going to talk about Dennis throughout this presentation today, is Dennis Comito, and he was the winner of the Chicago Marathon a few years back, and not many years before that, he was not even a long-distance runner. So when you think about these extraordinary, what I'll call performances, whether it's something purely intellectual like chess or physical like running a marathon, It's hard not to look at what sets these people apart from those who might not have been as good or as successful as these particular examples that I just gave you. We have to ask, is it luck? Is it timing? Is it the fact that they are just maybe born with it? How much effort and time they put into honing that specific craft, or really is it just sticking with it and perseverance? So as I mentioned, I want to go back to Dennis Comito and to his performance in the 2013 Chicago Marathon. And when we look at his particular performance, we notice a few interesting things in that first, even among marathon finishers, the distribution of performance is surprisingly wide. We see this sort of beautiful curve. Dennis is on the far left, finishing at just over 2 hours. And then all the way to the right, we see the 8-hour finish mark. I don't know if we have any marathon runners on the phone. I personally would be all the way to the right, probably finishing close to last. But nonetheless, there's this even sort of beautiful distribution of finishing times overall. Secondly, we found that the fastest runners are shockingly quicker than everybody else. And you can see that the top 50% of runners paced at a 10-minute, 11-second mile. So what that says is that those in the top half of performers averaged a 10-minute mile across the duration of the 26 miles. If you look at the top 40%, you get a 5% improvement. And you see this pretty steady increase of this 5, 6, 8% improvement time as you narrow it down to the top 30, and the top 25, and the top 10. Now, you would think that as you go into the top 5, the top 1%, or the winner, you would see a continued or even a degraded improvement. However, you see this massive increase, this 24% improvement, as you can see, between the top 10 and the top 1, and then a 23% improvement in the top 1 and the fastest. And you see this sort of hockey stick, right, at the very end, suggesting that the best are far superior than just the average or even those that are pretty good. The third thing we observed in Dennis's performance is that you can see the impact of goals and determination in the finish results. And what I mean by that is, it's a little harder to point out here, but it's most observed in the blue bar. So on the y-axis, it's the number of finishers. And on the x-axis here, it's the total time. And you can see that there's a big spike at the 4-hour mark. And what this tells me is that people may have been pacing to finish at 4:05 or 4:10, but they see their goal of finishing at 4 hours just ahead of them, and really they put forth that incremental effort to meet that goal. Interestingly enough here, if you keep looking, we see a little uptick, right, every 6 bars, which means a 30-minute increment. So to me, that means that people set these goals, and it has an impact on their personal performance. Now, not all of us are marathon runners, but we found similar patterns of achievement across many fields of human endeavor overall, both physical and non-physical. One place we saw this was with software developers. We use software developers in a lot of our examples. One thing that is unique about software development compared to other professions is that you can empirically measure how good somebody is at their job through things like HackerRank. And HackerRank is a coding exercise that assigns a score to an individual's hacking capabilities or software development capabilities. The median score across all HackerRank performances is 1,496, as you can see here, which doesn't really mean much until you start to see that the top 10% scores are just a little bit higher than that at 2,136. But the top 1%, you see that huge jump to 38% and then almost 3,000. And lastly, the top score among all performers is that incremental 47% at 4,348. And every bit of data that we're able to look at suggests that there is a direct correlation between somebody's HackerRank performance and their ability to do a great job as a software developer. So as you're thinking about hiring this talent, these scores, when you're hiring software developers, really become extremely important. And we found that the same patterns of achievement also exist in our workplaces outside of just software development. there's a lot of companies out there. I'm sure, those of you who are on the phone work for some of them, and you're trying to find people, that high caliber talent. We look at Steve Jobs, and Steve said that I noticed that the dynamic range between what an average person could accomplish and what the best person could accomplish was 50 or 100 to 1. Given that, you're well advised to go after the cream of the cream. A small team of A-plus players can run circles around a giant team of B and C players. And that is exactly what Steve did when he was at the helm of Apple. So Apple was developing an OS at the same time Microsoft was developing Windows Vista, as some of you might know. Microsoft, as you can see here, had 10,000 engineers dedicated to the Windows development, and it took more than 5 years, whereas Apple had 600 engineers, and it took less than 2 years to develop their product. If you've had the opportunity to use OS X, and particularly Vista, I don't think it's a far cry to acknowledge a superior product was developed using a quarter the number of people in half the time. So as we think about transformational talent, we ask 3 key questions that are going to drive the rest of this conversation. The first is, what is the impact of transformational talent in all of our workplaces? What do transformational people have in common? And then finally, how can we recruit and build teams overflowing with top talent? And I'm sure that's why a lot of us are on the call today. So let's address them one by one. We start with the question, what is the impact of transformational talent in our workplaces? And I think that, this is an appropriate quote as we think about transformational talent. Jim Collins said, people are not your most important asset, the right people are. And so what is the impact of having the right people? How much incremental impact comes from top performers? Well, it really depends on who you ask. And so we discovered 4 different answers from 4 prominent employers, the first being Bain & Company. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Bain & Company is a large and very well-known consulting firm across the globe. And they said that high performers are 4 times more productive than just average performers. At the same time, GE, who we all know, says that high performers are 10 times more productive than average performers. Apple, who we've referenced a few times already, they said that they're 25 times more productive than average performers. And lastly, I think the most surprising answer for me anyways, and as I'm looking at this data, is from Google. And Google said that high-performing technologists are 300 times more productive than average performers. Now, that's quite a different view, 4 times to 300 times, right? So who's correct? I mean, they may all be right? I think it comes down to the line you draw and how you define top talent. So our research shows us that a very small portion of your workforce has an outsized impact on business output. And to visualize that, you could get rid of these people, the bottom 10%, and it would have no impact on business. And one might even argue that it could actually improve your business. But we can definitely assume that zero output, as you can see here to the right, is coming from the bottom 10% of these performers. As we move on, the next 85% of your talent is responsible for 74% of your output. This is where a majority of your organization's work gets done. These people are incredibly important to not only the vitality of whatever operation your business or organization participates in, but the work overall. We found that 26% of output derives from the top 5% of workers, and that's 5 times the output of just the average worker. And lastly, 10% of the productivity comes from the top 1%. These are the most impactful people in your organization with 10 times more than the average worker. So it really brings us to our next question, and what do transformational people have in common? So if I'm recruiting talent, how can I identify these folks specifically? And this is where Indeed spent quite a bit of time, effort, money to answer this particular question. We conducted interviews with 15 mid-level to senior level managers, having at least 5 direct reports, so not new managers. And as you can see, we also conducted 2 surveys with both employers and job seekers, totaling a total of 8,100, adults over the age of 18. And through these different avenues of research, we think we're better able to answer the question. And thinking about the most impressive top performer you've worked with at your current company or a previous company, what is the number one attribute this person exemplified? And so I can't hear you, I can't see you, but I'm going to ask you all on the phone to just take a moment and think about that. So go ahead, and it doesn't have to be somebody who you managed. It doesn't have to be somebody who managed you. It could be somebody who you worked with, but you're really just trying to visualize and think about that awesome person that I'm sure we all have that stands out in our brain when we think about a top performer. So go ahead. Got it? Great. So it turns out that there are 5 common attributes that stand out among strategic talent. Things like problem solving, drive, self-direction, strategic thinking, and initiative. So first, problem solving. These are the people quite simply, right, who find the problem and they actually go fix it. Drive, in my mind, is essentially the desire to succeed. So you think about self-direction, I would think that it's best described as, this is the person that isn't comfortable just doing work that is assigned to them. They want to be challenged. We have the strategic thinkers. That's a pretty broad term, but to me, this is somebody who thinks outside the box, as we often find ourselves saying, to deliver a different perspective or idea other than what the average folks would have thought of. And then we have initiative. So these are often the people, when you think about success planning, you might hear their names. When you hear about your boss maybe leaving or moving on, this might be the person who you would think about taking over that role, the people who really take that initiative. So as we think about the combination of these 5 things, what makes this specific combination of things so transformational? Well, we know that not all things are equal or the same. So this drive, this self-direction, and initiative are things that people could arguably be born with. But at the same time, there is what we see here, problem solving and strategic thinking, giving them the capability to learn how to do things effectively. So back to that first question I posed at the beginning of our discussion. Are people born with this ability to be so great? And do they work at it? Is it effort or is it experience? And our research is telling us, and I think we might all agree, that it's a little bit of both, right? It's a combination of effort and experience. And Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote Outliers, the Story of Success, is quoted as saying, is there such a thing as innate talent? The obvious answer is yes, but the closer psychologists look at the careers of the gifted, the smaller role innate talent seems to play, and the bigger role preparation seems to play. So as people move along in their career, it's less about being born with it and more about experience and preparation. So what's the math, Bianca, right? Show us the data. We found that it's 60% effort, almost an even split, but not so much. 60% effort, drive, self-direction, and initiative. 40% experience, which is problem solving and strategic thinking. And so as you think about screening candidates or people, as you're identifying internal talent maybe, these are the things that you want to think about as you're trying to sort of peel away the transformational talent from the rest. And so based on everything we just talked about, what we know about the impact that transformation, and that's how can we recruit and build teams overflowing with top talent, right? I'm sure, again, a reason why a lot of us are on this call today. The most successful top talent recruiting programs are built on 3 simple ideas. And that first idea is that top talent have options. I'm sure most of us on the phone would agree that you need to inspire them. It is a candidate-driven market. And I'm not sure if you all remember, but when the Luxor was being built, it was this sort of modern marvel of a hotel. And Renee West will tell you, you can have the best strategy and the best building in the world. But if you don't have the hearts and the minds of people who work with you, none of it comes to life. Our research told us that people look for jobs when they're either inspired by a new company or disenchanted or discouraged rather at work. So we asked, which of the following best describes when you would look at career opportunities? And About a quarter of our respondents said that it was when they felt dissatisfied with their current job. 21% said when they saw posts about jobs or companies that interested them. And then finally, 19% said when they felt discouraged about their current job situation. But when it comes to choosing a job, the transformational talent or top performers are different. And so for top performers, inspiration is the primary motivator for career change. We saw that top performers were less likely by 23% to consider new jobs when they are discouraged at work. And so this is not to say that transformational talent doesn't get discouraged, but when they do, they sort of put their mind solving the particular challenge that's discouraging them rather than fleeing. So you think about that fight or flight, right? We all have that inside of us, that fight or flight response. And what this is telling us is that top performers, they stay and they try to figure it out versus reacting. Top talent is also more likely than the typical worker to be attracted to a new job by meaningful work. They're more likely to be attracted by 5% to what they consider meaningful work. 29% more likely to be more interesting, to be attracted to work, that is more interesting or challenging, right? As we talked about earlier, they want to be challenged. They're almost 50% more likely, as it relates to company reputation, to be attracted to a job. 47% of them would be attracted by a better work environment overall. Lastly, and interestingly enough, top talent is 10% less likely to accept a job for better compensation and or benefits. As we looked at our data, we found that the greatest companies use their mission, their purpose, and impact to attract transformational talent. What does that mean? Well, here's an example from Apple. If you're transformational talent, Apple feels, and our data tells us, that inspirational message such as this is going to draw the right demographic and the right talent in. So they start by saying, do your life's best work here with the whole world watching. The people here at Apple don't just create products, they create the kind of wonder that's revolutionized entire industries. Join Apple and help us leave the world better than we found it. I like that quote. Airbnb, their opening page says, create a world that inspires human connection. And again, they find that this targets and speaks to that transformational talent and really the demographic that they're trying to fit into their workplace. And for me, I like the end of this here where it says, we use hundreds of Post-its a week and we give the best high fives in town. That's not going to be something you easily forget if you're a job seeker and that speaks to you. And here, interestingly enough, where they typically would find, the job seekers would typically find a list of requirements, Airbnb highlights examples of their work that software engineers have done at the company. So this section right here is extremely hybrid real estate. It's very valuable. Instead of using it to sort of spew out a list of things that they may or may not have skill set wise, they really use it to speak to who they're targeting. They use it to inspire those people. And really, I think the goal here is one, to let them know what it's like to work for their company by giving those examples. Novo Nordisk, who you may or may not be familiar with, they identified that their top talent was very passionate about dedicating their time and for a cause in their local community. So they offer 10 paid volunteer days to attract talent who are passionate about a cause. Starbucks is very focused on a different angle, which is career advancement and college. And so they said, if earning a degree is one of your dreams, we can help you get there. We know more than 70% of our U.S. partners or employees are students or aspiring students, and we want to help. Supporting our partners' ambitions is the very best investment Starbucks can make. So if you think about it, if they are right, and you are in that 70% of people who are wanting to or are going to college, this is going to be something that inspires or interests you to work at Starbucks. Brings us to our second idea. In the internet economy, top talent will find you if you make it easy. And so we found that when it comes to career decisions, our transformational talent wants to be the one to choose their own path. They want to have control. They don't want to be dragged down a path that's not their own. And when it relates to control, right, we found that 62% said I would feel more confident a job is the right fit for me when I pick the company and apply rather than being contacted by an external party for the position. 56% agreed and said, I think I would be more successful in a job I found and got on my own versus a job which I got through an external party, i.e. a friend, a recruiter, etc. Top performers take initiative, right? They're actively out there looking for the right opportunity. 92% said that they search for job opportunities at least a few times a year. And 77% said they look at jobs monthly. Only 4% of top job performers hired were passive when it comes to job search. If you see here, our data told us that our top performers, so 96%, are considered active. So meaning if you're in the business of hiring people, which I'm sure most of you are, you're going to be far more successful in doing so by engaging with that active talent and making sure that your company is at the forefront of where people are looking for jobs. 4% of top performers hired in the last year were passive, and I think that's a pretty big jump. I think that's pretty good data. It turns out that they visit online job sites. They subscribe to job alerts. They use a mobile job search app. We're going to talk a little bit about mobile in just a few minutes. They looked at jobs on a company career site, such as your own, and about a quarter of them visited an online professional social networking site. But unfortunately, what we found is that many companies have recruiting processes that are inadvertently eliminating active transformational talent. So what does that mean? It means that you have to make it easy for this talent to get through your door. You have to put as little friction in the process as possible in order to get the best of the best. And so as we look at this, right, we kind of ask, how do we attract enough of the right talent to our company so that we can grow? And what we found is that it really comes down to a high coordinated end-to-end experience. So right now in your funnels, you may or may not believe this, but there is transformational talent that exists. The difference, though, is that unfortunately some companies with strong brands and reputations have an unfair advantage, and they may have a bigger or what we would consider stronger pipeline compared to other companies. But that coordinated experience starts with inspiring them. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of these in a few minutes, but making it easy to show interest, responding quickly to applicants, wowing them with a candidate experience, not only from the beginning, but end to end, building a personal connection with them, whether you're a recruiter or a hiring manager, showing them what is special about their company, your company, focusing on the offer and focusing on the right things. One thing we found is that companies, both large and small, accidentally eliminate top talent early in the recruiting process. So when we look at this funnel, it ends up looking like this, where an equal proportion of the top talent ends up getting eliminated one step to the next, as much as the non-transformational talent, leaving you with a smaller pipeline overall of that great talent that you're rightfully and really rightfully owed, I'll say, should you be putting in enough attention to this process end to end. So for example, if your application process is longer than 15 minutes, you're losing a significant portion of that good talent. And we found that the median time to apply, and we talk a little bit here about Fortune 500 companies, the median time to apply for a Fortune 500 company is 13 minutes. And that the longer it takes to complete an application, the more top applicants you'll lose. So 30% of candidates will not spend more than 15 minutes, and that number spikes significantly to almost 60% if they're earning over $100,000. Here we saw that for Fortune 500 company apply times, yes, they vary dramatically, but in some cases it's taking almost an hour for candidates to apply. To me, that is crazy. A minute is a little drastic. I'm not sure how many of them take a minute, but the average is somewhere in between. But I think the takeaway here is that an hour is way too long. The companies that you see here are putting as little friction as possible into their process, especially Netflix, you'll see here, and Salesforce. They want to make sure that they're not eliminating the best of the best. Again, not rocket science. In summary, if you have complex job application processes, you're going to lose most of your transformational talent. Screener questions in the average Fortune 500 online job application, 62.8. And it shows here that there's a direct correlation between the screener questions you ask and the candidates remaining. So as an example here, you can see that if you ask 30 screener questions, you're decreasing your amount of applicants by 50%. And again, it's not surprising that there's a correlation again between the companies with the lower apply times and the fewer screener questions. Again, you can see Netflix showing up number 1 on this list. And pretty self-explanatory as well here that if top candidates can't apply to your jobs, they simply will not. And so as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit more about mobile devices. And we always hear, mobile's coming, mobile's here. And I think we all can agree we probably all have some sort of mobile device in our pocket right now. 44% of Indeed's users are on mobile only. So if you can't engage with mobile job seekers, really you're not engaging with almost half the job seeker population in the world today. And what I like to point out here is, 44% are on mobile only. We see 38% on desktop only, but let's not forget this middle group here, this 18% that are using both. So in reality, it's really 44 and 18 as we're speaking to mobile. So what am I getting at? I'll leave us just in terms of the Fortune 500 company discussion. 56% of Fortune 500 application processes are not mobile friendly. And so for those of you who are not Fortune 500 on the call, many people think that they are at a disadvantage when competing with these large companies. This just points out one area where you might have an easy, quick win or an advantage when it comes to fighting for that talent. So what does great look like? I'd like to show you this example that we have from AT&T where they reduced their applicant drop-off by 55% and increased their applicants by 100K. Now, at first glance, when I first saw this, my heart kind of jumped, right? Because that's a lot of people. But I'd like to just put it into perspective. AT&T is a huge company. The goal here, though, as it sort of relates to all of us, is that their goal was ultimately to make hires. And they did that by cutting that apply process in half. And I think, again, it's all relative to the size of your business. Netflix, we like to call out this example. We've already referenced them a few times today. This is an example of their application page. Again, 5 application questions, 1 minute to apply, maybe even quicker if you have your resume handy and you know where to find it. And lastly, Indeed. Indeed enables a lot of companies to be great. And through our product, you're able to use what we call Indeed Apply, which is a 1-button apply process. We enable 4 fields, so applicants just have to put their name, their email, their phone number, and their resume. They can add a cover letter if they'd like. Again, we make it very easy, and it allows our partners or our clients to receive up to 2 times more applicants. So where do we go from here? I think it's safe to say, going back to that question that I asked you to think about, that person, that rock star, we can all point to that awesome person that we may have managed or who managed us or who we sat on a team with, but that shouldn't be enough. And it should always, we should always be striving for more quality and transformational talent. And Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook said, no team has ever had too many strong performers. Simply put, but a very powerful statement. And so we see that global labor trends will continue to increase the impact of top talent over the next decade. And so to enable that, we have this research that we've gone over extensively in this last year. And to get there, automation has to be a component of the solution. That's first. The reality here is that there's going to be there already is a skills shortage. It's real for many of the roles I'm sure we're all trying to fill on the phone. That technology is going to play a key role in all of this. And that at the end of the day, with all of this, fewer people are going to have that bigger impact. So this is what I want to leave you with today. Inspiring top talent as we think about how to recruit more transformational top talent. We've talked about ways to do that through job descriptions. We talked about company branding efforts. You got to make it easy. You got to make it easy for top talent to find your jobs. I would encourage you to go on to Indeed. We are the largest job site in the world, and search for whatever it is you're trying to hire for. See how easy it is or hard to find your jobs and the jobs you're trying to fill. If you're struggling, reach out to your client support team at Indeed. If you don't know who that is, reach out to me. I can help you find that person, and let us help you. Keep your apply process simple. Your leadership, or just simply the way that you've always done things. Maybe your leadership has gotten it down to a point where they've asked you to use 30 to 40 questions in an effort to help you guys source better or weed out the talent that you need to engage with. But I would encourage you to go in and try something new. Limit the amount of questions that you're asking, see what happens, and play with it until you find the right balance. Again, something that we can help you with. Creating that great top talent experience. Hitting the apply button is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to a great experience overall. And your recruiters and your teams, or you on the phone, you really do have the control over what we would call the levers that create a good or bad talent experience. We talked about the 5 markers of top talent. Look for them. Look for them in your screener efforts. Look for them in your interview processes. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to get offers that matter. And certainly money matters. I'm not here, discounting the fact or the importance of a competitive salary, but competitive salaries don't always have to be the biggest, and you can win by offering things that are meaningful. As we talked about earlier, sometimes it's not always about the money. So, I fundamentally believe this. I love this quote, and I love that we finish off with this quote. You can dream, create, design, and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it requires people to make the dream a reality. You all on the call today in the business of recruitment have an extremely important role. Your role is important to the viability and the growth and the success of your organization. I hope you took something away from this today. I hope that it was beneficial. I'm going to pause now and turn it back over to Katrina so that she can take questions. And if I'm not able to answer them on the phone today, as she mentioned, we will for sure get answers for you after the call. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. So I have a few here. For Gemma, who just sent through asking if we'll get a copy of the slides. The team at Indeed does not share their slides, but we will have a copy of the recording, right, Bianca?
Yes.
Perfect. And we have a few other specific questions I'd like to run through. So you talked about control of a career as a content feature. How might someone showcase that in their actual job description?
So control of I'm sorry, can you read that again or rephrase it?
Yeah, so you were talking about top performers really enjoy knowing where they'll be able to control their career as far as progress and promotion. So how might a practitioner apply that to a job description? Some kind of insight there.
I think the control component is mainly speaking to controlling the fact that they want to be active job seekers. So being able to research brand and culture versus having a recruiter reach out and try to sell them on that. So I want to be able to go on and do my due diligence and really learn about a company before I actively apply. So applying that to a job description, I would say really highlighting and showcasing your company's value prop, making sure you stand out and stand alone from the competitors, researching what your competitors are doing, and making sure that you're staying up with the key drivers in the business. And really trying to think like a candidate. We say that all the time at Indeed. We help people find jobs. That's our motto. Really thinking like the candidate if you are a recruiter. And what would you want to see, right? Giving them that control to make the decision.
Yeah. You mentioned this briefly, and I think our audience just wants a little more information on the search patterns that top performers use. So they obviously can make sure they invest and distribute their jobs via that source.
Yeah, and Katrina, I'm sorry, I think you're cutting out just a little bit. Would you mind saying that again? Sorry.
Yeah. Do top performers have any unique search patterns as far as where they are discovering jobs?
That's a good question. And in terms of search patterns, so as we look at search, obviously Indeed has all the jobs, and we have over 80 million resumes in our database. We do capture the footprint of everybody that comes in and applies. We also capture data for your company and for the candidates who are applying for different jobs. So it's a little different, in different industries. So a top performer in the tech industry is going to, their search pattern is going to be different than a top performer in, say, the healthcare space. But that's data that, depending on what industry you're in or what company you work for, I don't know who asked the question, you can partner with your client service person, and they can dig into that data and show you an actual report in regards to that. And we can follow up with that for you if you'd like to take it offline. I can find out who that person is.
Awesome. And our last question I have right now, if anyone has any lingering questions, please feel free to shoot those through now. Um, so just some advice as far as bounce rates. So Michael said that, he's experiencing, he worked on a short mobile friendly apply, but still struggling with bounce rates to actually get people to apply. What would your feedback be for him?
So I think what I'm hearing is that you tried to optimize your mobile site. Candidates are applying, but you're not seeing the pull through, and you're probably not seeing that turn into hires or interviews. Um,
Exactly.
so we're talking about a funnel. I would say the biggest thing that we see with candidates being stuck in the mobile process is how easy it is and how optimized your content is. We have a whole series that we focus on just mobile and how easy it should be and what that should look like if I'm a candidate. For instance, if I'm using my mobile device, the time it should take for me to go through the application process, again, no different from what I was talking about before. Not having to, we all have, a lot of us I'm sure have iPhones where you have to, use your fingers to make it bigger or smaller. Everything should be visible on that first page. Things like uploading a resume. We find the simplest things causing the biggest, the greatest amount of drop off. And so that's another, just as a follow-up item, we have a whole series on that. So we can either send out the content, or we might even have a WebEx or a webinar that's pre-recorded that talks about mobile and how to get the best rate of return.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If we don't have any other questions, I think we'll wrap up for today. Bianca, and Indeed, a huge shout out and thank you for making this webinar possible.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
All right.